Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Everything Co-op this morning. You know, this is a great day, and we're going to talk about co-op with Mr. Paul Hazen. Paul, good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing this morning, Paul?
I'm doing great, and you?
Fantastic. Paul, you've had a wonderful life in cooperatives, and I would really like to share your life history in this cooperative movement. And I'm a little envious of you because I didn't learn about co-ops until about 20 years ago. But you've had your whole life. How did you get started in co-ops?
Well, I guess I was born into it. I'm from Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin there are more cooperatives than any other state. And I grew up in a small town, and there was a farmer co-op and electric cooperative and telephone cooperative in the community, and so co-ops were just part of life. And in a small rural community, people have to work together to get anything done, and so there were a lot of informal cooperatives where the community would come together to take on projects that no one could do by themselves. So I guess it's part of my DNA and part of my whole life story.
So you said a farmer cooperative, an electric co-op, a telephone co-op?
Yes, and that's just in our community. And, you know, in the county, there were all types of, dairy cooperatives and credit unions, a whole variety of cooperatives. It's how people thought about organizing businesses.
So with all of these different businesses, what would you describe or define a co-op to be?
Well, it's a business. It's a business by people. It's owned by people that use the business. And so in the case of the telephone cooperative, it was the people who got their telephone service from the cooperative, they owned it. And if the cooperative made a profit at the end of the year, those profits would be split up and with the consumer owners, and everyone would get a share of the profits based on their patronage, based on the percentage of the revenue that they happen to generate. So cooperatives are, in the Midwest, are a very popular form of business, allowing communities to own and control the businesses there. The money stays in the community; it doesn't go to outside stockholders, and it's a great way to build wealth.
A great way to build wealth. I like that. That's one of the reasons I love co-ops. Yes. Okay, a great way to build wealth. So you grew up in Wisconsin, and you were born into co-ops, and then when you started your career in co-ops, what was your first sort of job in co-ops?
Well, just before that, really wasn't my job in cooperatives, but after I graduated from the University of Wisconsin, I went to work for a member of Congress from my home congressional district. His name is Alvin Baldus, and his political base were the cooperatives. And so I would go to meetings with him all throughout the congressional district, cooperative meetings, and, mainly farmer cooperatives and electric cooperatives, and could see the fantastic work that these cooperatives were doing and the benefits that their members were achieving. And so we did a lot of work in Congress to help support cooperatives. So that was my really first introduction to an interaction with them. And unfortunately, he was defeated for re-election in 1980. And so I found myself without a job, but I went to work for an organization called Rural Housing Incorporated. And this organization was started by electric cooperatives in Wisconsin as a way to help improve the housing stock in the rural communities. And as part of that, we would often organize housing cooperatives. So that was my first job in actually working with cooperatives, both with electric cooperatives who were sponsoring the entity, but then also going out and organizing housing cooperatives.
So the electric cooperative, so let's talk about rural electric co-ops for a minute before we go back to the housing co-op. Why were there electric co-ops, rural electric co-ops?
Well, prior to the 1930s, most of rural America did not have electricity, and it really held these parts of the country back because they, couldn't modernize their farms and their communities. And the for-profit investor-owned electric companies would not go out to the rural communities because they didn't see that it was profitable enough. So President Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s created programs that allowed people in rural communities, farmers and other people in rural communities, to organize and create their own cooperative, electric cooperatives, to bring themselves the power that they needed. And it really was a huge economic boon for rural communities for the first time to get electricity to run their farms and their stores and their homes. And so it was about 46 million people now across the United States receive their electric power from electric cooperatives.
How many people?
46 million. So it's a huge industry for rural America, and it provides great benefits to these rural communities.
Okay. I've heard that the electric co-ops also have, their grid is like 75% of the land area?
Yes, that's right. And so when you think about it, it's a lot more expensive to cover that size of an area with your wires and your poles than it is if you do electricity in an urban area where houses are, one right next to the other. So, these electric cooperatives, they operate as businesses, but, they're not out to seek to make a profit for any outside stockholders. They're there to provide, good electric power at a fair price to people in rural communities.
So the for-profit businesses would not go into rural areas to put in electricity. So they created rural electric co-ops. Businesses where the people that used the electricity owned the business.
That's correct, and so it was people helping people, the community coming together to pool their resources. And to establish electric cooperatives that they then could, provide the electricity throughout the area. And there was one basic rule, is that everybody was going to get electricity in rural communities. Because the person at the end of the line, often referred to as the last mile, that's the most expensive, part of the electric grid. And oftentimes for-profit companies would stop and not provide that last mile of service. But people in the cooperatives, said this has to be for everyone, and everyone's going to, share the burden equally. So I think it's a real testament to the vision that these people had, that they wanted to be inclusive and fair and make sure that everybody had the same opportunities.
Boy, that's interesting, and it's also so very interesting that today, sort of like you don't know how it would feel to not have electricity.
Yeah, that's right. We take that for granted now, and it wasn't that long ago. And so, when you think about cooperatives, they often get started because the market's not providing goods or services, and that's really the way it was in the 1960s and 70s. People wanted whole foods, organic foods, natural foods, and they just weren't available. And so people got together and organized food cooperatives, consumer-owned food cooperatives, to go out and to find these type of foods and bring them to the marketplace. Now we take that for granted. You can buy organic foods everywhere. But in the 60s and the 70s, when people were getting concerned about the quality of their food, it just wasn't available, and so people had to organize themselves in order to procure the food and transport it and make it available to everyone. So that's often, the role that cooperatives play is filling a gap in the marketplace where it might not be profitable enough for-profit companies, but people banding together to do it for themselves, it makes economic sense.
We had that showing of the documentary Food for Change that Steve Alves created last month, but I understand, I don't have a date yet, but that movie, that documentary is going to be shown in Ward 8, which is called a food desert because there's not a place you can go close by, and they're looking at creating a food co-op there in Ward 8 to bring in the fresh fruits and fresh vegetables, and they're going to air that movie, that documentary. And as soon as I find out when it is, it's supposedly sometime in December, later this month, that I'll let people know about it because I'm wanting to go also.
Well, that's an interesting example because that's happening all over the country. When President and Michelle Obama, put a focus on food security and healthy eating foods and really, really shown that there are food deserts across the country where either good, healthy food is just not available or it's too expensive. People have been rising to the occasion and organizing food co-ops all over the country. We're seeing a real boon in new food cooperatives getting started, and with a particular focus on food deserts. So this is a great model. Again, the for-profit market economy, for whatever reason, has chosen not to go into these areas, and the way to get people healthy food is for them to join together and to do it themselves.
Well, it's just like the electric co-ops are the capital for-profit companies couldn't make money in it, and that's the same thing. They don't see making money in Ward 8, so they don't go there, or Jackson, Mississippi, or all over where these food co-ops are coming up. And so people can band together and work together and also minimize the expense, labor expenses, so that they can bring in the food that they need or the electricity they need or the housing they need or whatever the need is in an economy. And that's why I love co-ops, and I assume you do too.
Right. Well, and this whole issue of food security is not only an issue here in the United States, but it's around the world. And right now, oftentimes there's enough food, but the distribution of the food and things is not efficient, and so there's a lot of waste. And I've been working for about the last 25 years in organizing cooperatives in the developing world.
Well, we're going to come back and talk more about that, but we've got to take our first break. And we'll be right back to talk to you more about the kinds of things you've been doing in your life to create and develop co-ops. And if anybody out there have a question, you can call in at 1-800-450-7876 if you have a statement or a question to ask Mr. Paul Hazen. And we'll be right back as soon as we get the weather, the traffic, and the news. Please don't touch that dial.
1450 WOL.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks. Everything Cooperative is what we're talking about today, and we have the distinct pleasure of having Mr. Paul Hazen on this morning, talking about his life experiences in developing cooperatives, doing research in cooperatives, just building the cooperative economy in the U.S. and around the world. And how long have you been doing this, Paul? You look like a young man, so I don't know.
Oh, well, probably 35 years. I've been involved with cooperatives.
And your first job, it was in the political arena.
That's right.
And then you started, and you said the electric co-ops started creating rural housing cooperatives. So I wanted to go back to that because I learned about cooperatives being a property manager, managing housing co-ops, and that's where I learned about them. So these electric cooperatives, I guess using the sixth principle of cooperatives, cooperation among co-ops, started creating housing co-ops. So what was that job like, and why did they need to create housing co-ops in Wisconsin?
Yeah, well, the electric co-ops are not just about only providing electricity. It's, providing a variety of services to their members and, building up rural communities. They want a better life for their members. So it's not only, we're going to provide them good electricity. We want to make sure that they have all other opportunities. And they saw a need for better housing in rural communities in Wisconsin. And so it was just natural for them to use the cooperative model to help people organize housing co-ops in order to provide a better housing stock in rural communities. And so they created a nonprofit organization called Rural Housing Incorporated, and we provided technical assistance to local groups in order to help them with the expertise that they needed in order to organize a housing cooperative.
So was this for the whole community, or were you focused on seniors or any particular group of people?
It was a mix, depending upon what the community needed, we often tried to do kind of a mixture of different types of populations in the housing co-op. Young families all the way up to seniors, something that would reflect the nature of the community.
What I have found out, and the research shows that housing co-ops are better than apartment buildings. They work so much better. Every variable that you could think of, lower rents, people feeling better about their housing, their community, lower crime. I can't get why the U.S. government, and HUD particularly, doesn't put more money into housing co-ops as opposed to apartment buildings. Apartment buildings seem to help the wealthy because they're the ones that make the profits. They do provide housing for affordable housing for folks, but housing co-ops doesn't do such a better job. You have any sense of why HUD and the U.S. government doesn't put more money into housing co-ops?
Well, oftentimes organizing a co-op isn't easy. You have to bring the community together, and it takes time. And my observation is that the Congress and any administration, they want quick action. And it's much quicker to bring housing stock to the marketplace if it's a rental property where you're dealing with one developer and not trying to build community. So I think our greatest asset in the fact that we bring people together in a community to help themselves from the government's perspective is maybe a negative, that takes too long and it's expensive to do that. Long term, as you said, we can demonstrate the benefits, but I think too often, the political class they want short-term results and are not willing to invest in the long-term assets that are needed in order to provide real benefits.
I'm glad I asked you that question because it makes sense, and I have toyed with that for, the last 10 years of why not, even long-term, that you have less foreclosures. They end up having less rent that they pay. I mean, there was a co-op, and they did a study of a co-op, Wildwood in Atlanta, where a two-bedroom was running $500 a month, where a two-bedroom apartment down the street was $700 or $800 a month. So if the government was having Section 8 vouchers or putting money in it anywhere long-term, it's a lot less money they have to put into it. So I just financially, it makes more sense, I guess, like long-term, but most politicians are 4-year terms, and they've got to get something done in those 4 years. So I guess they have a short-term focus. I guess that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And then,
Paul?
And the other benefit that is not taken into consideration is the opportunity in a cooperative versus a rental for the members to build equity, to build wealth.
Absolutely, so, totally, yes.
So if that's what we're trying to do is to raise people out of long-term poverty, the best way to do that is to give them an opportunity to own a piece of property.
The Wildwood study showed that a person got 7.1% return on their membership fee, which a lot of times is the security deposit. And they were saying it's the great investment because they couldn't get that anywhere else. And but that they also didn't take in consideration that opportunity cost that I talked about. If they were down the street, they'd have to pay $700 or $800 a month, where they only had to pay $500 in the co-op, and that having to pay a lot less meant that they had more money to spend on other things, whether that's education or savings, and they got a what do you call it? They could do a write-off of their taxes and interest. So all the way around, it's better. How do we get the government to need more politicians like Franklin Roosevelt that you talked about? Any other comments on this one?
Well, no, I think it's been a problem that we've been facing for decades, and you're right. It'll take someone with some vision and leadership, and there are all kinds of other examples beyond Franklin Roosevelt. President Kennedy and Senator Humphrey. We're all big advocates of cooperatives, and we made great progress with President Obama. He sees worker cooperatives as a way to provide good jobs throughout the country, but especially in low-income neighborhoods. And so there's been a real emergence since the Great Recession of worker co-ops in this country. So I think we just have to keep at it, and those of us who are advocates for cooperatives, we just have to keep pushing.
Put you on the spot here a minute. What do you think about President-elect Donald Trump? That you think he might be an advocate for co-ops?
Well, I don't think we don't know. He didn't make any statements about cooperatives in the campaign, but here's what I think we ought to think about is to cooperatives are business. He likes business, and we're a great example of public-private partnerships where we can bring communities together, and he certainly, made an effort to focus on those type of issues. So, showing that here's a business model where people can help themselves, where they can create jobs, create better communities is what we need to show him. And I would hope that he would see this as a great business model that, anybody can take advantage of. Anybody can use and be a member of a cooperative.
He did go to a rural electric cooperative meeting. I forgot which.
I believe that was
state.
In South Carolina. I think you're exactly right. So,
yes.
So that's a great first step.
I like your optimism, and you're a real politician, sir. I mean, you're looking for the right way, and so I guess that's what you've learned throughout your life in this cooperative world is how to look for the right way. So after rural housing, where did you go from there?
Well, I came to Washington to work for the National Cooperative Business Association. This is the apex organization that represents all types of cooperatives. And I started out there working with food cooperatives, doing educational programs and doing advocacy work on behalf of food co-ops on Capitol Hill. And, you brought up the politicians. The great thing about cooperatives is they appeal both to liberals and conservatives. Liberals like it because it's people helping people, it's inclusion and empowerment for people. Conservatives like it because it's business and creating jobs in communities. And so we have a great model here that should appeal across the political spectrum.
Okay. You're getting me to be optimistic here, Paul, and I needed that because I've been praying a lot since Donald Trump won, and felt like Bernie would have been a better candidate for co-op because he has preached co-ops, and he had tried to get money for worker cooperatives from the Senate floor. So he had done a lot. So I thought he would have been the best one. But you got the right look, and I like that. It's very helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful for people out there. And we're going to take our second break. And we'll come back and pick up on your life history and the things that you've learned about co-ops and how to develop co-ops. So we're hopeful, and why NCB is sponsoring this program, that we can get more and more people excited about cooperatives, whether they're conservatives or liberals, and create more and more co-ops. But we'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
1450 WOL.
Welcome back again, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks, Everything Cooperative. We have Mr. Paul Hazen on the show with us this morning, who has been very helpful to me and looking forward and optimistic to our future with our new president-elect. Paul, you started NCBA, National Cooperative Business Alliance, and what did you do after that, your first job?
Well,
after your first job there.
Yeah, I spent about 25 years at NCBA and really working on cooperative development issues, both domestically and internationally. We were responsible for creating rural cooperative development centers across the country to provide technical assistance to local people to help them organize all types of cooperatives. And there's now a network of over 25 of these organizations that we helped start. I worked on that for many years. At NCBA, I led the effort to achieve the top-level domain for cooperatives, .coop. The sponsor of this program, the National Cooperative Bank, they have their website, ncb.coop, and that was an international competition. And there were over 1,000 different top-level domains at the time proposed, and there were 7 that were chosen. So cooperatives were seen in a very good light in order to have one of the first top-level domains just for cooperatives. The only way you can get that web address is that you have to be a cooperative. So I was very proud of the effort that we put into that to raise the visibility of cooperatives and to give them an advantage in the marketplace. But I've done a lot of cooperative development work across the country, both in rural and urban areas.
But that co-op we found very interesting. We being Pat Thornton, who produces this program, and we have everything.coop. So we went through the process of getting that approved, and it turned out to be, as I talked to her, it turned out to be really easy and fun, that the people that were doing it were quite nice and helpful. Like you said, NCB, National Cooperative Bank, is ncb.coop. NCBA, National Cooperative Business Alliance, is ncba.coop. But I really like it. So our web address, if you wanted to get past programs, you could go to everything.coop to get past programs. And this program that we're having with Mr. Hazen today will be on in a week or two. So thank you, Paul. That was quite helpful. Now, I want to go back to these 25 co-op development centers. Can you talk a little bit about where they are, and if somebody wanted to find one, how they could go find a development center if they wanted to develop a co-op?
Sure. Well, they're all throughout the country, and they're really what we found is that there's a lot of economic development work going on in communities. But oftentimes in these organizations, there's very little knowledge about cooperatives. So you might have a local economic development agency or a unit of government or someone who's out there trying to create jobs and develop the economy. But they don't have the expertise in cooperatives. So our concept was that we would create a network of centers where there would be staff on hand that had expertise in cooperatives. And they've organized themselves into a group called Cooperation Works. And so you can go to cooperationworks.coop, and there you can find resources, but then also find if there's a co-op development center near you that could help someone in a local community organize a cooperative. So again, it's trying to provide the resources necessary for people in communities to improve their lives.
Cooperation Works, cooperationworks.coop.
That's correct.
And you can find the 25 centers and see if there's one close to you. Because I keep talking to people, and when I tell them about co-ops, they get excited. Then the question is, how do I get more and more information? And I would tell them about CDF, Cooperative Development Foundation.coop, CDF.coop, and they have some funds to help different people start co-ops. They have a fund to help people start food co-ops. They have about 6 funds. But I don't have all of these 25, so thank you for that. Cooperationworks.coop. Okay, so what are some of the other things you did at NCB, particularly international? You said you developed co-ops domestically and internationally.
Yes, it's a very interesting story. In 1961, President Kennedy put forward a new Foreign Assistance Act, rewrote the foreign assistance legislation. And Senator Humphrey at the time from Minnesota said, you know what, cooperatives have been so successful for rural America. Let's use this as a model to help people in the developing world improve their lives. And so written into the 1961 Foreign Assistance Act are many provisions for the encouragement of the development of cooperatives. That legislation is still in place today. And so the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development have a mandate to help people in the developing world to organize cooperatives. Well, when the government set out to do this, they said, you know what, we really need to draw upon the expertise that we have in U.S. cooperatives. And so they said, the federal government at the time, U.S. Agency for International Development, said, could the U.S. cooperatives come together and advise us on how to approach this? And so the organization that I happen to run right now, the U.S. Overseas Cooperative Development Council, was created. And this is made up of all the major cooperative sectors in the United States, credit unions, agriculture cooperatives, housing co-ops, food co-ops, electric cooperatives have come together, and we advocate for cooperatives both in the administration and in Congress. And these organizations also receive funds from the federal government to organize cooperatives in the developing world. It's been a very successful program, lifted millions of people out of poverty across the world. And in some countries, the cooperatives are major players. As an example, in India, the largest dairy business in the country is a cooperative made up of 12 million farmer members. Most of them are women that, for the first time, as they join the cooperative, make money and empowered to own a very large, successful cooperative business. That's just one example, and I could give you, Vernon, hundreds of examples of similar success stories around the world.
I've often wondered if, you take the State Department, if we had a policy, an international policy that said we're going to do exactly what Kennedy talked about as our foreign policy is to help to raise people up as opposed to most of the time I hear talking about foreign policy, it is fighting against Iraq or Russia or something, and it's sort of, how can we have a better emphasis on this sort of helping people to come up? Because I was struck when the United Nations said they're going to use the year 2012 as the year of the cooperative. And I was fortunate enough to be in the audience at the UN on, I think it was October of 2011, and listening to around the world, the co-ops, the cooperators around the world talking about what they were doing, whether it was in Russia or Germany or Argentina. It didn't make any difference where, but it was this sort of like there was a common thread of we all want to see our people improve. We all want to see our families improve. And with that common thread, it seemed like we'd have a much better foreign policy of emphasis on this than on the places that it looks like there might be a war or fighting taken out. Do you have any sense of that?
Well, it's, again, lots of examples in post-conflict countries where cooperatives have been used to heal communities and bring people together that once were adversaries, and bring them together into a cooperative business where they're dependent upon one another. And if you're dependent upon your neighbor for your livelihood, you're much less likely to take up arms against them. And so it's a great model. It brings democracy to many of these countries that have never known democracy, where they, for the first time ever, they may have a chance to vote for the board of directors of the cooperative and learn about running for office and being responsible to your fellow citizens. So we often say that when there's cooperation, nobody gets killed. It's bringing people together. So it's been, in many countries, it's been a fantastic business model to heal many wounds and to bring communities together.
Well, I hope you don't mind us using that. Well, Pat and I are constantly getting quotes, and this is one that I want to use. When there is cooperation, nobody gets killed. Yeah, that's phenomenal. The one that Dame Pauline Green, who was the president of ICA, said, cooperation brings people out of poverty with dignity. And that's, up until this one, that was my favorite. When there's cooperation, nobody gets killed. That's really, really good. I couldn't figure out why, but that's what I've been getting as I've been talking to people, that when there's cooperation, people just work together, it seems. And I guess it is what you just said, they're dependent on each other. And therefore, the first cooperative principle is that it's all-inclusive, that it doesn't make any difference of what somebody's religious background is or their where their political outlook, what their gender or what's their racial, that is voluntary and open membership throughout. So it would lend itself to this thing. If you're in a cooperative, you depend on each other, and it doesn't matter about any of these things. But the other thing you said I find interesting is mostly women in this Indian cooperative. And what Jessica Gordon-Nimhard said in her book, Collective Courage, in the Black experience of cooperatives, it was mostly women also. Why do you think that's so?
Well, when you look at agriculture in the developing world, the women do most of the work. And so, again, your point about it's an inclusive business model. So if you're going to organize farmers in a particular country, the women have to be members of the co-op because they're, in most cases, doing most of the work on the farm. So, and it's one of the things that, as you already said, it's just one of the cooperative principles where everybody has the same opportunity. So that's the reason why you see so many women, because they're the ones doing the work on these farms.
I had a lady on the program once that said that women just get along better than men. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it brought some laughter to the conversation. Okay, we said voluntary and open membership, democratic member control. You've already mentioned that. You've already mentioned member economic participation. They put money in and get money out if there's a profit or surplus. They have to be autonomous and independent. And the first reason I like co-ops was because education, training, and information is one of the principles. We've already talked about cooperation among cooperatives and concern for community. And, Paul, those are the 7 principles, which you know better than most. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the other things that you're doing right now. We are having our final break, and we'll have our final segment, and we'll come right back. Please don't touch that dial.
$14.50 WOL.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks with Everything Cooperative. If you wanted to get some of our previous shows, you can go on everything.coop. That's everything.coop. And we have on the show with us Mr. Paul Hazen, who's had 35 years in the cooperative business, grew up in Wisconsin, where throughout his community there was nothing but co-ops. I didn't have that same experience growing up in Bluefield, West Virginia. Paul, to my knowledge, there were no co-ops, so I didn't get this until 20 years ago. So how can people get to Overseas Cooperative Development Council if they needed to just learn about it or see about it?
Yep. They can go to our website, OCDC.coop, and learn about the work that U.S. cooperatives are doing around the world. The members of the Overseas Cooperative Development Council are working now in about 70 countries around the world in agriculture, credit and finance, insurance, telecommunications, electricity, really doing in rural parts of these developing countries, what we've done successfully here in the United States and transferring that knowledge and empowering people that in many cases would never have any opportunity without the cooperative.
That sounds fascinating. And right here in the U.S., you helped to start something called
Community Purchasing Alliance Cooperative.
Consumer Purchasing Alliance, CPA.
Yes.
And I guess that's CPA.coop?
That's correct. You can go to our website and find out all about it. It really got started as a reaction to the Great Recession. And if you look at the history of cooperatives, often there are waves of cooperative development following economic or social upheaval in the country. That happened after the 1890s when, the big robber barons and the big banks controlled things, and there was a severe recession after the Depression in the 30s, after the social unrest in the 60s, and now after the Great Recession in 2008 and 9. And people say, we just went through some tough economic times. There has to be a better way to organize business, and people often find the cooperative model in that search. And right here in Washington, D.C., a group of religious leaders said, our religious institutions suffered during the recession. People lost their jobs and they weren't able to contribute as much money to their favorite religious institution. What if we got them together and combined their purchasing power and bought things that they all need to save money that then would allow them to put money back into their mission and ministry and programs in the community? And so out of that was born the Community Purchasing Alliance Cooperative, where these institutions joined together. They jointly purchase electricity, natural gas, trash hauling, janitorial services, installation of solar panels, copier machines, anything that a institution would need in order to run their organization. And it's been very successful. We've been in business formally for just over 2 years. We're completing our 3rd year. And as a startup, we didn't make money right away, but now we're making a profit that can be put back into, distributed to our members at the end of our fiscal year. We've expanded to include charter schools. Right now, 10 charter schools in the district are banding together to install solar panels. So there'll be a great savings for these charter schools and their electricity, but then also they're reducing their carbon footprint. And we're very much in the Community Purchasing Alliance, not only about saving money, but by doing business with vendors that share our same values. We're very much of a values-driven organization. As an example, when we got bids for trash removal, we did not go with the lowest bid because they did not pay their employees a living wage. So we decided to go with a higher priced option, but we were guaranteed that their employees would be paid a living wage, and that was very important to us. So we have another saying. We like to say, we change the world even when we take the trash out. We're really trying to, do business in a different way and make sure that we are putting our values into place when we're buying products or services in the community.
Okay, so this Community Purchasing Alliance, first off, anybody out there listening, you can go to cpa.coop to get information about this. You started out with churches, and then you now have charter schools. I know we looked at some of the housing co-ops, particularly affordable housing co-ops, and I was very pleased to find out that the properties that I managed were already getting a lower price on trash collection, and I did have some of them quote, the people that you are using. And that they said that because we were doing it as a third-party management company, we had negotiated some pretty good deals. But I bought my copy machine through you guys, and I was so impressed. I tell you the place, which you didn't mention, where I was impressed with was the contract. When I was reading the contract that the copier company gave me, everywhere I said I was going to have a disagreement, he said, they've already worked that. You won't have that problem. So CPA had already worked out a contract that was better for the people that bought that copier machine. And I finally told the guy, well, just give me the contract they've already worked out and don't give me this old one. So not only do you help save money, you also have the expertise to make sure that the contract that's been given is good for the church, the charter school, or me or anybody else that's working with, in my case, affordable housing folks.
Right.
Who else can join this group?
Well,
who else can be a member?
Yeah, any community-based organization can join the CPA. We not only have churches, but we have synagogues and mosques. So it's open to any religious institution, community-based organization that is in the D.C. metro area. And you made a very good point. Oftentimes, many of these institutions are run by volunteers or even a skeleton staff that do not have the expertise to know the market and to negotiate good contracts and agreements. And so we have professionals who do that. And I know my church, Founder United Methodist Church, we utilize a lot of the programs of the CPA, but we wanted to install solar panels and really did not have the expertise to understand the contract and the requirements in order to install the solar panels. We did that through CPA with about 9 other institutions, and it was, it would have cost us a fortune to go out and hire an attorney on our behalf to help us with the contract. CPA did that for us, and it was a great example of how, again, working together, everybody can benefit. And your example of the copier contracts is repeated in every one of the products or services that we offer. So I would encourage any community-based organization out there, a nonprofit organization that is interested, to go to our website, cpa.coop, find out information about how you can join, all the various products and services that we offer. We really have great plans for this co-op. We want to continue to expand in the D.C. metro area, but we have plans to replicate this across the country. We think there's, harnessing the purchasing power of community-based organizations that allows them to save money and put money back into the community. That's a win-win for everybody. And so we hope that this could be a great economic, engine for community development and programs that help lift people out of poverty.
Well, like your motto, save money, do good together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that. So that if they save money, then they have more money for programs. And I also went to another meeting where they had in Southwest all of not all of, but a lot of the properties in Southwest with all of this construction going on coming up, to talk about how they could do good together to sort of welcome the new properties and what kinds of things they could do. So I like the idea of working together not only to purchase, but also to figure out how they could do good together. That's phenomenal to me.
Yeah, that's the whole purpose. I think as we've developed this cooperative, people have become more interested in those aspects of what we're doing. Saving money is important, and that's good. But building a better community is what's really driving people. The opportunity to, encourage people to pay their employees a living wage or above, doing the right thing by the environment by increasing, recycling and lowering our carbon footprint. Those are the things that really have the impact on the local community.
Well, that's pretty much the last word, Paul, except do you like what you're doing?
Oh, I love what I'm doing. It's having the opportunity to see people improve their lives and being a small part of that. That's what gets me up out of bed every morning.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I'm so glad you came on, and I'll look forward to talking to everybody next Thursday. In the meantime, please work cooperatively. And, Paul, I can't thank you enough for what you do for our country and for our world. Please keep up the great work.
Well, thank you, Vernon.
All right. Bye now.
$14.50 WOL.